And we're live. Welcome to the Dark Ozarks.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Lisa. It's good to be here.
Yes, it is. Hey, Josh. Hey, everyone.
We hope everyone is having a good week.
Yes.
As we begin our autumnal progression toward All Hallows Eve, I'm quite excited because I have coffee in my Richie Mansion house, Newtonia, Missouri cup. I'm quite happy about that.
There you go. And not too long until we're there.
Unrelated, I have my Llewellyn's Pub in St. Charles, Missouri cup.
Oh, neat.
That is full of basmati rice.
Of course it is.
As one does with one's pub cup.
Yep.
I like the word pub cup. It almost is a pup cup. But I digress. We have a great calendar of live events in Dark Ozarks country that has already kicked off. We've got 2 events behind us. We'll talk a little bit about those. Welcome to, of course, the long format of Dark Ozarks on Wednesday night. And State of the Ozarks Fest is done. We were in Caney, Kansas last Saturday. Next up, October 7th in Hollister, Missouri.
Yes, for the downtown Hollister walking tour. We will be telling ghost stories. We will tour the very haunted, very beautiful Old English Inn. And it's going to be great because we're going to tour downtown, stories, folk songs, all kinds of things going on.
Really, really neat event. Check out paranormalsciencelab.com for tickets.
Yes.
Some of the events that we do are just like State of the Ozarks Fest. You just show up. Some events are ticketed events. The tickets are oftentimes available at the door, but to make sure that there is space, we do recommend people purchase those in advance.
Right, because some of the locations definitely do run out of tickets, which is a good thing. And when you do go, you are supporting those locations or the organizations that we work with. And so money goes to good causes. After the 7th, on the 15th, the following weekend, we are in Joplin for Dark Ozarks October Country, which is an all-day event that's being held at the VFW Hall just off North Main Street. And it's going to cover a variety of topics under our wheelhouse of Dark Ozarks. And it's an interactive event. So it's not just talking heads. You participate. We are a community, and it makes it very special. Plus, there's food and refreshments.
Yes, there is. I'm particularly looking forward to the cheeseburgers myself. It's I saw one of them go by while we were doing a survey investigation there a couple of weeks ago, and I've been dreaming about cheeseburgers there ever since. Just throwing that out there. Into the ether. It doesn't take much to get me excited. Snack cakes or cheeseburgers will do it. I am basically Shaggy and Scooby combined at this point.
That's pretty accurate, actually.
It really is. Then October 20th.
20th, yes. We will be back in Joplin for the Old Downtown Walking Tour, where we cover the history of early Joplin and ghost stories that come out of it, in conjunction with Third Thursday Art Walk. And we are partnering with the Joplin Downtown Alliance on that event. They support the artist community in the area, as well as being instrumental in a number of historic building restoration projects. So proceeds from that help them out. So it's a good cause. Then after that, on the 29th, we will be in Newtonia, Missouri at the Richie Mansion and the Civil War Cemetery for a tour of both delve into the history, and then a tour of after the tours, an investigation. So, and there's food and refreshments for the first time at that event. So
yes, very, very excited about that. It's going to be great. Great to get back to Newtonia.
yes.
We were there in April. Very excited to come back
Mhm.
again. This is going to be a 3-part tour. Something that I love about, of course, we're getting ready to do this for the Haunted Hollister walking tour, and then also the event in Newtonia, is that these are multi-part events. And this is there's a lot of experience that happens over the course of the evening.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and we get a lot of good feedback off of it too from people who've attended. So very excited about that. And then November 19th, we actually have 2 events going on that day.
Mm-hmm.
In the afternoon, we will be at Always Buying Books for book signing for both of us.
Mm-hmm.
Followed that evening by a tour and investigation at the Web City Library, which a lot of people may say, library for a ghost hunt. It is very haunted, has been from basically when it opened, full by apparitions, poltergeist activity, and more. So it's always a good event, good time, and proceeds help support events at the library. So
yes, they do. Proceeds also help with the VFW. They help at the Richie Mansion. They help in Hollister, and also in downtown Joplin. So it's exciting to just be a part of it, and it's exciting to just the you all, the public, getting to meet folks in person, and just getting to share some of these locations. It still amazes me the number of people, even here in my immediate area, in the Branson Hollister area, who've never even been in, for example, the Old English Inn.
But that happens everywhere. People walk past places that they live near all the time and never go, and are surprised that other people are interested. So don't make that mistake. Get out and see your local history.
And local history, regional history is a huge part of what we do. Now, since we are long format, we can dig into this a little bit. You and I, over the weekend, had the opportunity to be in some really incredible Ozarks borderlands, actually the quote unquote little Ozarks of Southeast Kansas.
Yes, it really was fun. Great weather. It was beautiful. It really was. And there's certainly, we drove through parts that really did make you think you were right in the middle of the Ozarks. So,
and a huge thanks to the SEK Paranormal for inviting us.
Yes, we were very honored. It was a lot of good conversations and good people. Check out their page, SEK Bordertown Paranormal, and follow them and see what's a little further west of you if you're here in those Ozarks.
It is. I was excited. I get excited anytime there's a road trip into new country.
Yes, that's true. You do.
I do. I really do. And I love seeing that. And admittedly, and one of the things that for me was a great takeaway from the conference is that this, for us, for the Ozarks, it's borderlands. And if people are confused about borderlands, I'm not implying that it's a part of the Ozarks. It is not, but it is an important cultural region that is, comes up and borders the Ozarks.
Right.
And Southeast Kansas has a lot of really, really interesting phenomena that really has not hit mainstream.
It really isn't, and I know we plan on delving into some of it more over time, but there's a lot of not only hauntings and UFO sightings, cryptids, and just creature monster type lore that most people probably would not associate with Kansas, and very interesting.
It is in so many cases when you're on the ground digging into it, whether it's folklore, whether it's legends, whether it's paranormal occurrences, whether it's just
history,
you, no matter how hard folks try, unless you're really invested on the ground, it's very hard to do things other than present surveys.
Here we go.
It's very hard to present anything other than surveys unless you're really invested on the ground.
That's true. That's true. And that's one thing I really like about this project is we are doing that and getting out and getting on the ground in various places and having a lot of fun doing it too. So.
And of course, a big shout out to Jessica and Pam and the rest of the team for doing a lot of that heavy lifting on the ground work of research, investigation, and collecting stories from that region. And I think, I certainly be excited to see many of these stories because of their work get a larger audience.
I would too. And hopefully we get, are a part of that. But we made an interesting stop along the way as well.
Yes, we did. And in the shadow of the Bender's Mound between Parson, Kansas and Cherryvale.
Yeah, just overlooking the homestead site of the Bloody Bender's Inn. And it is definitely an ominous spot, even though there's nothing there. I mean, there's no buildings around or anything, but you do feel like you are on very solemn ground.
You do. We were there at dusk, and there's a great video, I would say, that you and we shot a video, and I think now would be a good time. We don't talk a lot about this, but Facebook has offered Dark Ozarks a subscriber option. Yes. Where folks can help support us financially, really in a very similar way to Patreon. And
yeah, pretty much the same format. And people often, sometimes people will say, well, why would I pay for something on Facebook? And well, obviously the page is free. That doesn't change. The subscriber group is a private subscriber only group that the fees actually go towards our research efforts and other projects which will be coming down the line, including some books coming before too long.
Yes. And it is an opportunity for people to help support and be a part of this work. And the first thing that the folks get out of that is essentially insider videos. And we have our regular public stuff that we do, like we're doing right now. But when we're out in the field and when it's when it's late at night and it's very off the cuff, a very unvarnished insider view of Dark Ozarks, State of the Ozarks, and Paranormal Science Lab behind the scenes is it's a lot of fun. And it for us, we're pretty chill on a regular basis, but it really is very much off the cuff, particularly on location. And that's what happened Saturday night after the conference. We're going, wait a second, we're going to go right by this place. Let's actually get on the ground and give our impressions, show people what this space looks like. It's a very haunted. Energetically, just the space is dark, and a strong sense of watchfulness, and it's an opportunity to follow along. So if that's something that you're interested in, check out the Dark Ozarks subscriber option. We put a lot of content on there behind, but for subscribers only, and you can be part of the team. And as things develop, you'll get first dibs on a lot of stuff, as well as the potential of giveaways and that kind of thing.
Exactly. There will be more things coming along. So we do really appreciate the support there. So, I was curious, I was going to ask you, since we were talking about All Hallows Eve, and certainly the vendor's homestead is, known to be one of, not only a very dark place because of what happened there, but to be haunted. What were your thoughts?
In terms of the homestead itself?
Yeah.
My disclaimer on this for the skeptics is that these are just my energetic impressions, just my impressions from being within the space. I believe the location is haunted. That much I feel very confident in saying. There's too much violence and too much concentrated death
And anger.
And very violent, untimely death within that space, because the vendors would murder quite indiscriminately. And these were people who, and I think what's particularly chilling is, unlike a battlefield, in which presumably many of the soldiers going into battle understand that this is a possibility.
Right. It's a risk, a known risk.
And for the individuals who were murdered by the vendors, that they were stopping at an inn. They were stopping where they believed they would be safe, they would be cared for, they would be fed. And the idea that the next day or the next morning, they would pack up their belongings, their loved ones, their children, and proceed on their way. And so many of them did not. That the violence within that space, I think, creates an energy pattern that is a haunting in and of itself, before you even get to the potentiality of sentience.
I agree, and I don't know. I don't know that there's something sentient there, but I've been in a number of locations where there was very gruesome murder and violence, and not all of them have the same sort of energy, and that space certainly did.
It did. For me, I sensed a pressure, a malevolence, a watchfulness, and a watchfulness, particularly in the fence row, that made me uncomfortable.
Yes.
Made me not want to be there. I was happy to get over to Parsons.
Yes. I think we both had the same feeling.
Yes. And it seems that we began to experience the same feeling about the same time, without really talking to each other, until we were back in the car.
Yeah, because we reacted at the same time, I noticed.
Yep, it's time to leave. Well, and for me personally, at this juncture point, a very strong impression that one or more of the vendors are the ones haunting it, although the vendors did not die in that location.
Yeah, it definitely felt more like a predator energy rather than a victim.
The victim, some of the victims' sentience may remain there. I don't know. It would be very interesting at a future point, and we stayed on the actual road. I want to be clear about that.
Yeah. We were on the public access.
Yeah, It is a field,
Mhm.
but it is private property. We did not go onto the private property. We remained adjacent on public access.
Yes.
It would be interesting at a future point to organize an investigation in that location, just to see
Mhm.
what shows up in terms of potential EVPs, etc.
And I do have connections that can possibly make that happen.
Hmm. I also something that is very I think resonant about the Bloody Benders story is that the legend really reads like an urban legend until you dig into the history and you find out it's true.
That's true. Sometimes it really is. Truth is stranger than fiction.
And that is the case. So coming into this is the beginning of the Halloween season. We have crossed the boundary, crossed the border into the autumnal equinox. It is no longer summer, and we're counting down the days until October 31st, November 1st. Now, it's fun in the sense that in the the old traditions, a lot of the the thinning of the veil, the interaction with the other world, etc., is associated with the turning of the earth.
Yeah.
And so
that's very true.
And so, and of course, individuals who are familiar with some more contemporary or modern practices, esoteric practices, or particularly, I think that in a lot of people's case, they simply are introduced to things like the solstices, the equinoxes, and Sabbats through an introduction or familiarity with Wicca. But these are, a lot of people don't realize Wicca is actually a quite modern esoteric religious movement.
Yeah, not even 100 years old.
No. Now, it has certainly historical and cultural cross ties to much older traditions, but in terms of a formalized structure, it's actually comparatively new. Interestingly enough, bluegrass is the same way.
Well, that's very true. I wasn't expecting to segue into music.
That just decided to take a left turn there. But also, that in that Wicca is associated with those turnings of the earth, those points, the times of the moon, the times of the sun, etc. But these date back much in the same way. Here's my cross reference to tie it all together, perhaps successfully, perhaps not, in the same way that Celtic, Scots Irish music traditions inform bluegrass. I think that very, very old pre-Christian traditions of the Celts at times very much inform modern day Wicca, although they are separate, just in the same way that Scots Irish music is not bluegrass, but there's some shared relationship.
Yes, shared relationships, some influences. Now, I think that is fairly accurate. That being said, maybe we ought to talk a little bit about sort of those origins of, quote, Halloween.
Absolutely. Let's talk. We have two great sponsors we don't want to forget.
That's right. That's right.
Always Buying Books in
Mhm.
Joplin, Missouri, and the Beard Engine Brewing Company in Alba, Missouri are both fantastic. Not State of the Ozarks, Dark Ozarks, long day. Dark Ozarks sponsors. Bob and Elise do an amazing job of curating phenomenal collections of books. I have already been the happy recipient of many, opportunity to buy a number of books. Looking forward to purchasing many more.
Yep.
And Always Buying Books is also sponsoring our October 15th October Country Dark Ozarks at the VFW Hall in Joplin.
Yes. And we're very appreciative of that. And Beard Engine Brewing Company is a phenomenal place. Great atmosphere. It's haunted, and it's been named twice in a row as Missouri's best brewery by the Missouri Brewers Association, and it is the only English style brewery in Missouri. So a unique experience. Plus, there's good food there too.
Excellent food, great beer, phenomenal location, well worth your visit, and as is Always Buying Books. And I believe you'll get to engage in a little bit of Always Buying Books experience hopefully at October Country.
That's true. That's true. My understanding is that there will be a selection of relevant books for sale that are of interest to those who are interested in the topics we cover. So come on out and find some interesting books.
Exactly. And by that, we mean buy them before I do.
If they rush to buy them before Josh does.
Countdown, I will buy them all and become a shaman before you. Not you, Lisa, you, the audience. You want to be very specific about that.
He just doesn't want to get on my bad side.
Let's just say I have a lot of respect for your skills.
Thank you. Likewise.
Thank you. Okay, Halloween, best holiday ever. You get to stay up. There's no issues of having to be good, and there's candy
And costumes
and masks. It is fantastic. Where's my costume? Wait, where's my antlers?
Next week, I guess.
We'll be antlering it up next week. So really and it also evokes a lot of strong feelings.
Yes.
Positive and negative. I think that particularly American Protestantism has quarreled with Halloween for a very long time, and there's a long historic tradition of that dating back to the Puritans.
Yes.
And I do come from a tradition that has, I do come from those traditions as well myself, and I have a lot of respect for that. So
I mean, same.
Yeah. And interestingly enough, of course, it is what I think is, so we have, in terms of strata for Halloween, and this is our introductory Halloween, Spooks, and Halloween long format. So we'll be talking about Halloween and things related to Halloween in the Ozarks from here on out. So this is, a great opportunity. Primer on Halloween itself. You have a heavily commercialized American holiday on top right now.
Yes, and especially in North America, our idea of Halloween is very egocentric, that most of even the rest of the English-speaking world would not really recognize.
True, although the juggernaut of American commercialism is changing that. I found out, comparatively recently, and hopefully nobody throws anything at me for this. I don't remember my sources, but I was talking to somebody, and they were doing a traditional commercial American Halloween in Spain. which really threw me off. And of course, it is, worked its way over to a variety of other locations. I've talked to folks in Germany who are like, hey, we're having an American Halloween, etc., with the idea of candy, trick-or-treating, masks, pumpkins.
Okay.
On October 31st.
The American economic push just can't be stopped, I guess.
Not at this juncture point, and we'll see how things roll as we move forward. But it is, of course, these elements is what informs us of Halloween today. You've got, you've got the traditional fright houses, spook houses, the haunted cornfields, the jack-o'-lantern carving, which I love, trick-or-treating, making candy, going door to door, and then just a season of general spookiness leading up to November 1st.
Yes. And I guess, and that's one point that really does diverge from older tradition, is that in older tradition, Halloween or All Hallows Eve was really just the prelude.
I agree. I think that's an excellent point because the spookiness, quote unquote, that we associate with the thinning of the veil really begins. Actually, if you want to really get down to it, to a large degree, it begins at Lunasa, in early, typically very late July, early August, depending on the calendar that in that particular year, because it's a point that it really becomes noticeable that the sun is waning.
Right. Yeah, days are starting to get a little shorter and theoretically a little weaker.
Yes, and there's a great, albeit perhaps a little spooky, connotation that the sun is dying, and the sun of that year is entering into its senescence, and it is where and autumn is coming with it, and the darkness of winter. And for rural agrarian subsistence communities, you were hoping, your entire existence, your survival was centered around the success of the harvest. And if the success was, if there was success, you were ensured, the fact that you weren't going to starve to death over the darkest, most frightening time of year. And that frightening time really began about October 31st, November 1st.
Right.
And reached its darkest with the winter solstice, the longest night of the year. And then you slowly, and then it's sort of an slow uphill survival until Imbolc, which is approximately February 2nd, when the days get long enough, and the beginning of spring is offering hope that you are going to survive.
Yes. So basically, almost half the year, you're concentrating on just not dying.
Yes. And
which may be the best explanation for the fascination with slasher films.
Agreed. It's actually slasher films are just a how do we kind of, I only halfway believe what I'm about to say. I'm just being me. It's a representational play in microcosm the ancient and impossible to avoid evolutionary biology that is programmed within us to attempt to survive the winter. It's just that they take it and they put it, they compress it into 2 hours and say, can you make it? The the aforementioned slasher villain is winter, and they're just trying to survive, which could also explain the misplaced fertility motif that keeps showing up with all of those frisky teenagers.
Could be. And we may have just written a future writing project outline.
oh, Wicker Man. I love the original with Christopher Lee, not the travesty that is the second remake.
Yeah. To the horror of certain people that we know.
Wicker Man. So, if you don't know what we're talking about, look up Wicker Man. If you're easily scarred, you'll, enjoy. You will be. It's a lot of fun. 1970s British horror film, and I love it. And upon repeated watching, I start cheering for the townspeople instead of the uptight police officer. It is terrible and wonderful. And by the end of it, I'm going, yay, Wicker Man, which says something terrible about me. Anyway, not what they were intending, I think. So that was my confession. But it is that long decline. And something that happens with modern day Halloween, as you've already noted, is we have Halloween October 31st, November 1st hits, and it's over. And that is not fully accurate to really just the reality of the season.
No. I mean, there is a reason it's All Hallows Eve. It's, Eve is prelude to something. And, whereas Halloween is, basically our acting out the idea of hiding from the specters and the ghouls, the things that come through the veil. The next day is really supposed to be a celebration.
It is, and there are elements to it. Now, part of the celebration is it is a harvest festival, and it the September October months traditionally was a time when ideally there actually was enough food that you weren't that for a very brief time there was enough, hopefully, if the season was good, enough plenty that you could just be like, okay, I can eat all I want, and at least for a few festival nights. Also, as evidence, in case anybody wonders, beneath all the strata, we're dealing with an ancient Celtic holiday. So, stories and traditions that we see in Scottish, Irish, and Welsh lore, as well as some British lore, which that has a whole nother connection, because British originally sort of meant Welsh, and as opposed to Anglo-Saxon. Anyway, British versus England. It gets confusing if you don't know what I'm talking about. Sorry. But that many of these traditions do speak into Halloween or Halloween traditions, and harvest, as well as the the butchering of excess cattle, and the old Irish stories of things like the cattle raid at Cooley really point out that cattle were sacred. Beef was extraordinarily important, and wars were fought over cattle.
That very true. And since you already went to Wicker Man, I'll bring up Harvest Home. So yes. And basically an American 1970s horror movie that also highlights this time and the importance of ritual for preparing the earth to survive winter for the next spring, which involves sacrificing a man's blood to the earth.
Which is something. It's one of the stickier aspects of our ancestry, our shared
Literally.
is the Celts did human sacrifice.
They did, and they were rather fond of beheading. So
yes, the cult of the beheaded, of the severed, the cult of the severed head, which does make its way into the Ozarks in
yes,
a variety of formats, and was something that definitely screwed with the Romans when they were exposed to the Celts and their traditions. And and that's how we know about the really, what we know of these ancient Celtic traditions comes from really about three primary sources.
Mm-hmm.
The more literary is what the Romans wrote down when they were exposed to the Celts.
Mm-hmm.
And the Romans were exposed to the Celts in surprising ways in a number of locations, because the Romans went to war against the Celts mostly successfully in continental Europe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in continental Europe, they were mostly successful, although Rome did get sacked a couple of times. But
yes, and interestingly enough, even Delphi, the Celts raided Delphi in Greece, and the Celts, along with the Scythians, were semi-nomadic horse people from the Caucasus, and that had okay, so the Celts didn't just pop out of the ground in Britain. They were a semi-nomadic horse people. I love it. It's certainly some echoes of Rohan, the great horse lords of the plains, and they were not and never were a united nation. They were unified through language and tradition. We know that they were unified through burial custom. And locations in modern day Germany, and particularly in the Alps in Hallstatt, with the salt mines, is one of the early known archaeological origin points for the Celts that they recognized, and they were recognized in the 19th century as a people group with shared custom. Again, predominantly by burial custom and by art. The Celts were very sophisticated in their art, and very notable by the Romans as having specific ways of doing things, including war. And some of those ways you can tie. You can look at the way the Romans were describing Celtic warfare 2,000 years ago. And then you can look at the way that Union history describes fighting the Scots-Irish in the upland South of the Civil War. And you can draw comparisons that are not dissimilar.
No, and for very valid reasons. I mean, because a lot of those Confederates came from those traditions. And so it's what was passed down through generations.
And there's
plus just tendencies.
What's that?
Plus just tendencies.
Yes, some of it is learned, and oral tradition is a huge part of the Celts. Ironically, if you think about it, and including what we do right now, we share stories orally. Certainly a interesting thought.
Mm-hmm.
Something that I do love about the Celts, and I find this this cultural dichotomy. And by the way, if you wonder why we're doing this, Halloween is a Celtic holiday, so bear with us. We'll get into the spooky stuff in a moment. Now we're just in the bloody stuff, which is almost as much fun. The bloody and literary stuff. The Celts were a highly sophisticated, non-literate people. I find that a fascinating dichotomy in and of itself, and one that decries the concept of barbarian, because we associate illiteracy with a lack of culture.
Right, but the Romans were very, pretty blunt in acknowledging the Celts' sophistication.
Mm-hmm.
They pretty much talked about the Celts as barbarians in a different category with other barbarians.
The Celtic art really sets it apart. That objectively makes it impossible to deny the Celts' sophistication as a people.
Very true, very true. Plus, very rich, detailed oral traditions.
Yes, and that brings us to the next 2 points. I think one, a primary source of much of this lore is simply in the preserved folklore and tales, the mythology tales of Ireland, Scotland, and Wales.
Mm-hmm.
And that there is a very rich and documentable compendium of this lore. Sometimes it's called fairy tales, sometimes not. W.B. Yeats was instrumental in collecting and documenting a great deal of it. Another that comes to mind is the Welsh Mabinogen, and the branches of the story, which I love. I have a particular love and affinity for the Welsh story tales for some personal reasons. Family ancestry is Welsh. Have about 50% of it, and then of course all the incredible richness of the Scottish tales, and the understanding that these speak heavily into a variety of things, beginning with the one that comes to mind, the old tales of the Irish god Lu. Which brings us to Ulgunasha, which then brings us to the autumnal equinox, and then the Halloween traditions, which under a variety of names in Irish Gaelic, it's Samhain, which in Irish Gaelic is written as Sam Hain. And I love it that the historical traditions and the folkloric traditions of Samhain, with the proper spelling Samhain, began making its way into bits and pieces of pop culture, including I posted this on it was one of my Facebook memories the other day. This week, I think, was in the real Ghostbusters. They had the god of Halloween showed up, and they had to deal with him, but they're calling him Lord, Lord of Samhain.
Yeah. That's true.
And it's pronounced within the context of the cartoon Sam Hain. And there's a number of media points in the 70s and 80s that reference Samhain, but there was no linguistic direction to give them the Irish Gaelic pronunciation of Samhain. Right. So they were just reading it phonetically in English.
Right, which and phonetically, that's what it looks like. So,
yeah, and I honestly like both pronunciations, and
I do too, to be honest. Typically, I I love precision in language just because it's my background, but in this instance, frankly, I'm good with either pronunciation. That probably offends some people.
And interestingly enough, I tend to lean the same way. But I also think that language, by its very nature, over time evolves, and it's important to show a little bit of grace to that process. And I like both pronunciation. So all that to be said, I have a strong Celtic ancestry. I know you do as well. And if you say Samhain to us, we know what you're talking about, and we like it.
Yep, we're
Although
good.
At this point, I'll probably call it sound.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So that kind of gives people that idea of where it all comes from.
Yes.
And the spooky motifs really kind of gradually over time come out of that, because it's a time that traditionally it was viewed that the dead could walk the world, they could cross the veil. So you didn't want to be seen by them because you didn't want bad things to happen. So masks and disguising yourself from supernatural forces goes back thousands of years in Indonesian lore.
Yes.
Really from Western Europe to the subcontinent. And so I think it was just natural that it became the ceremonial, and in the early, hundreds of thousands of years ago, it was ceremonial. So did we freeze?
I think
We
we're
froze
back.
for a moment.
Okay. I think it's back.
I believe so.
Okay.
Yeah, we're good.
Okay.
Awesome. For hundreds of thousands of years, ceremonial, and that's when it froze on me.
Oh, okay. Ceremonial traditions were to use masks and costumes to either disguise yourself from gods and so that the ghoulies and the bad things can't see us and harm us.
Yes. And an interesting cross-reference that particularly when you look at northeastern Native American tribes, the Iroquois, the Algonquin peoples come to mind. And not just there, long tradition of masks in these ceremonies.
Very much so, and used throughout the world in shamanistic practices.
Yes, and it there's so many references to this from ancient shaman practices that it really makes you wonder, in terms of origin points.
It really is. It is interesting and trying to figure out where these ideas traveled from where to where.
It does, and there's a couple of different ways. I think taking a really really broad 10,000 mile high take on things, which is has benefits. It also has issues with it as well, but I'm going to do it for a moment. Is on one hand, it suggests the idea that there's common origin points for this, or ancient common origin points, and that is really fascinating. The other is an idea that if you strip away modernity and you really begin to engage in, regardless of tradition, engage in truly shaman practice, regardless of of what continent you're on or what your ancestry is, that everyone, it ultimately is engaging in the same natural cycles. They're engaging in the same potentially supernatural cycles, the same paranormal phenomena. They're essentially interacting with the same library. And
true, maybe just with different names.
Yes. And so the idea that we wouldn't bat an eye at the aspect that shaman society, ancient shaman practices around the world all involve some form of solar recognition, because everybody sees the sun. Well, what if these deep practices in association with mask wearing or the paranormal or metaphysical dimensions is actually no different in terms of its existence, its commonality, than say the sun and the moon?
Personally, I think there is commonality, and you see it continued to today, just in people's experiences, because people encounter these kind of anomalies and phenomena around the world and continue to do so.
And it's to me, it's really fascinating to to dig into. The other thing that has to be taken into account is something that I think that colonial European content struggled with, which is primitive, quote unquote, societies around the world had an enormous amount of cross-pollination of ideas, in some cases transatlantic and certainly trans-Pacific pollination of ideas that were decidedly pre-Columbian.
Yes, and I think that is part of that is just that fear of things went on we don't know about.
Yeah, and in the certainly what I would classify ultimately as an imperial Roman perspective, which is, we have established the known world and we are going to create grids and squares and cubes, and we're going to place knowledge as well as people into those systems. And for the betterment, for the creation of civilization, in some cases eroding an existing civilization in order to achieve that. And is certainly a number of European power structures carried forms of that tradition on, the British Empire being the most successful. And I think that to a large degree, the American power structure that keeps refraining from calling itself empire, being the one to carry that on to a large degree. So, this modern system has that really, is not so modern. You could say it's easily 2,000 plus years old in terms of its perspective. Certainly brings a lot to the table. It brings, order, civilization, taxation, and roads, infrastructure.
And plumbing.
And plumbing, yes. I'm a big fan of plumbing. Really am.
Me too.
On a daily basis, even, which is, makes everyone around me happy. And but it does come with a price, and oftentimes that price is a narrowness of perspective, because the world around us must fit within the perspective of said empire.
True. Let's shift gears for just a second now, and for since we're talking about All Hallows Spooks, why
Yes.
why do you think the imagination is so consumed with ghosts
With ghosts. That's a
and
good question.
in conjunction with Halloween?
In conjunction, yeah, okay. Well, I think for a lot of people, a lot of there's a number of people who don't believe in the paranormal.
Right.
There's a number of people who simply say, "I don't know,"
That's fair.
and then there are people who, well, there's people like me who just always have, regardless of experience, because I just do, and I
Mhm.
chalk that up to ancestry,
Same.
among other things. And then there are the folks who may not have believed and then suddenly experience phenomena that they have no context for. So there's four groups of people that take up a good chunk of society.
Well, and let's be fair. Studies say that a majority of Americans, as well as Europeans in general, because we're talking about that kind of our collective
Yes,
culture and history that Halloween grew out of, do believe in ghosts. So
correct.
every skeptic out there, there's at least someone additional that, even if they're not saying it, they do believe.
They do.
Now, why Halloween? Because
Why Halloween? Some of it, of course, is simply cultural. It's
Mhm.
cultural momentum. For me growing up, there's a number of reasons, but one of my earliest memories is going into the dime store, and all of a sudden there's all the Halloween decorations, and there's ghosts, and there's witches, and there's movie monsters, and there's masks, and there's candy, and of course it brings up the question, okay, what is it? And it's like, oh, it's the spooky dead stuff. And
Yeah.
for me, you had me at spooky dead stuff. I was in. So certainly, just cultural impact. I do think for individuals who allow themselves to be a little more introspective, it is the death of the year.
Yeah, I think that philosophically and traditionally, that's where it comes from. I think people also know that it was not an exclusive time for people to kind of fixate on spirits and ghosts, and that traditionally Christmas was a time as well that we don't often think about. But we won't really get into that. But I just wanted to let point out that we tend to think of October and the Halloween season as sort of the ghost season, and it's not always been that way.
It has not always been that way. Of course, those of us who do paranormal investigations, we deal with the misconception that ghosts are only going to show up in October, and they're not around the rest of the time. That's not the case.
No.
Activity is able to be documented all the time, year round. It's also not something that happens only at night. I think that's
Right.
another misconception. And
Definitely.
but it is one of those things that you really you do get, and you've seen it, I've seen it, a heightened interest in paranormal tours, ghost stories, scary movies, etc. This is the time for it. To answer the question, I think that it's a culmination of 2 points. One, just the cultural, I suppose, conditioning, but merchandising and just the expectation of the time.
Mm-hmm.
And we have several hundred years of American culture and North American culture that's pushing that. And then also the death of the year. You're coming into a time, the leaves are falling, the temperatures across much of the United States are getting colder. It is getting a little more bleak, and the nights are getting longer, and I think those things come together, and there is a tie within that process.
I think so. So we've gotten to ghosts. Should
Yes.
we talk about a few?
I think that's an excellent idea. Both, lore as well as, actual investigation.
Okay.
Where would you like to start?
Oh, I don't know. I think it's interesting. There are almost sort of, we've gotten to the point that people are so, the pop culture has gotten sophisticated enough around this that we have categories of ghosts now, lots of them.
That's a good point.
And so just your traditional idea of a ghost has, now been divided into, your apparitions, your shadow men, poltergeists, just and a lot of now, I think, and in part, I think attention is on this a lot because of the paranormal reality shows, non-visual things.
Yes.
That have lost a distinction of, instead of there's just something supernatural or paranormal or not normal happening, like something sliding across the table. Now, because of the conditioning of the reality shows, I think people say, oh, it has to be a ghost.
Yes. Or a demon. That's the other. Oh, that's the other big player.
Yeah.
Which, real quick digression, there is elements, particularly, from Protestant and more fundamentalist Protestant aspects, demonic and or either hyped or real satanic cult activity are associated with Halloween as well.
That's true. That is a point. And, particularly in about the late 70s through the 80s, there was this really that they, a satanic fear, almost movement, but where people suddenly saw satanic worship everywhere. And there were a lot of accusations thrown at people, and not a lot came of it. In fact, there was extended study by the Department of Justice into cases where there were allegations of satanic activity, and basically very little evidence that there was actual satanic worship, that it was, if there were things going on, it usually was just kids, being kids type thing, pranks and things like that. And that really, I think that atmosphere really grew out of The Exorcist, that it seemed to really take over the psyche of America.
I think that's, I think this is that particular, elements of American culture at that juncture point definitely falls into the category that we keep coming back to with Dark Ozarks, which is sometimes there are no easy answers. It's a very complex process that, something that we see consistently. In some cases, we have almost mob hysteria that in an early situation. In other cases, we have some very concerning cult worship, particularly in rural America. And
there are a few examples, but even that itself, usually they found very little that was, quote, satanic based. And then it seemed to die down. And then it's, sort of during the midst of that, you had The Exorcist, you had the Amityville horror case that was very prominent. That over time it kind of died down. And then with the advent of the ghost hunting shows, as some of them seem to really, pander to histrionics and have a demon a week kind of motif, it became more prominent again. And then you start hearing more about a handful of places around America that supposedly, were demonic hauntings. And while there are a handful that have been certified by the Catholic Church as demonic, very few.
Yes.
And the rise in movies, shows, and books related to that topic have coincided with the rise of ghost hunting shows, particularly taking a quote demonic bent.
And that I think is a really important discussion point for this, because coming out of this, there is a lot of media sensationalization,
Mm-hmm.
and whether it is the implication of a malevolent spirit or an inhuman malevolence, meaning it never was human, it's a demon, is great for ratings.
Mm-hmm.
But in the mass majority of paranormal cases, it does not reflect the reality. And in most cases, you're dealing with, and we work with this on a regular basis. We work with hauntings that are quite benign, sometimes even a bit entertaining, and is very much no different than interacting with the living going about their lives. It's just they're doing it without their bodies, basically, for a variety of potential reasons, some of which make sense, some of which do not. And it allows us, certainly allows me, I'll just speak for myself, but I think we're on the same page on this, allows us to, first of all, not be freaked out in the majority of situations, not to be afraid in a majority of the situations. That the vast majority of paranormal occurrences are actually quite normal. And simply it's important to tread with appreciation and respect for those who have gone on before, and not be scared. It certainly, and I'm speaking for friends and family members and individuals that I hold a lot of respect for, and traditions that I hold a lot of respect for, because I come from these from these traditions and I'm a part of them. That there is a lot of fear associated with ghosts. And what I consistently encourage people to understand is that in the vast majority, not 100%, but in the vast majority of cases, you don't have to be afraid. This is not something that is, it's not going to possess your soul. It's not going to follow you home. If it does follow you home, it's going to get bored. It's going to go on its way. You can have yes. You can have very reasonable conversations, albeit sometimes one-sided because you can't hear them in most cases, but not all. But very reasonable, conversations to say, look, I'll take care of the picture that you really care about. I respect your home. Thank you for letting me come into this space. This is a beautiful space. Those types of things. Simply being civil and respectful, and will get you a long ways. And on the rare occasion that you find something else, be very respectful and leave it be.
Exactly. And there is some parallel to this fascination with the inhuman that goes along with fright houses.
It does.
Curtains.
And that's, I just want to interject just briefly. Nearly every public tour or public survey investigation or demonstration, public investigative demonstration that we do, etc. We will invariably, and I think it's where the culture is at this point. I think it's a very fair question. So I'm not like, oh my gosh, that's a stupid question. I think it's very understandable. But there will be folks who are afraid
Mm-hmm.
that what they're about to get into is basically going to be a fright house. And
Yeah.
we have the opportunity, and I always enjoy this, we have the opportunity to assure them and help them understand that that's not the case.
That's true. And I think part of it is just the socialization that we go through, that so many people have gone through fright houses, that it's hard for them to conceive that there is something that's different, that you
Yes.
quote a real haunted house is not a jump scare.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And we have the opportunity to showcase a number of real haunted houses.
Yes, we do. And the good thing is that we've seen a lot of people who have been hesitant or skeptical who have come out the other side, very much appreciating and sometimes having very real experiences.
Yes, all of which is I consider to be a very positive thing.
I do too.
So now, minus my digression into demons and Satanism, that we have, as you noted, we have a bunch of traditional terms, a bunch of traditional, specter, phantom, ghost, poltergeist,
Mm-hmm.
Ghoul. That's a little more
Ghoul.
technical.
Boggart.
What's that?
Boggart.
Yep. So we're up to 6 there, and then we have things that have really come into the nomenclature largely post-internet. Shadow Man being the top.
Yeah, I think that I don't think they just started happening then, but they were just perceived as a different type of apparition. And at some point, the fact that they were in shadow versus, flowing white gown or whatever, took on a connotation of its own. And some of them have gotten pretty outlandish, in my opinion. And just since, during the, 20 years I've been doing this, it's progressively become more exaggerated. Where, when I started, it was a shadow form or a shadow man, that pretty much investigators just viewed as it's another type of spirit. To over time, and I think this is media sensation, all shadow men are evil. They're dangerous. They are going to do something to you, although there are no cases I know of anyone definitively saying a shadow man did anything. You don't, there are tales of a ghost that somehow has managed to, do something to someone or move objects or something. And you don't really get that same with shadow men. It's just the idea that they're, quote, dark in color that people become petrified. Then we got the red-eyed specters, the red-eyed shadow men, which I've always bemused that, it's like they have, laser pointers or something. That suddenly those were, even worse. And some of the sort of anecdotal, tall tales, you kind of equate them to vampires.
Yes.
That even to the point of hovering outside windows, and they have to be, I've heard some people say they have to be invited in, that kind of thing. But again, they're going to do something to you, but we've never really had a case where Shadow Man directly has done anything.
Right.
And then the Hat Man, and I'm sorry, people, but this is the one I find the most amusing. Is, oh my God, he's wearing a fedora. Look out.
Well, and this is, I'm speaking as someone who has binge listened particularly. I look at, okay, so for people who don't know me, I look up scary stories on YouTube, and I use it to fall asleep to. And did it again last night. I don't know how many nights I've done this. And very rarely does something happen that, that I'm actually listening to that actually freaks me out. And the rest of the time, I just find it really relaxing. So there is a viral cottage industry of weird, spooky stories that are pretty much all taking their cues off of the same internet phenomena.
Yes.
And they are fiction. I think that is an incredibly important point. They sometimes they are very well written, and oftentimes they are not. And it's a really fun rabbit hole to go down.
But we compare notes on them at times. So
yes, we do. And I listen to these for the entertainment of it. I actually listen to them for the relaxation of it. I'm not sure what that says about me. But I also listen to it for sociocultural and literary analysis, and listening for the commonality of the story. It's sort of like the 16 English murder ballads that really all say the same thing.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's in some ways it's collecting modern folklore as it happens is basically what you're doing.
Right. And the only one of the larger differences is with the speed at which information travels at this point, and the ease at which you can record and upload. That instead of, say, the proverbial 16 English murder ballads that get a certain amount of revision by the time that they get to Kentucky, now we have thousands of versions worldwide, or thousands just in the English language, of Slender Man, Shadow Man, Shadow Men, Hat Man, Black-Eyed Children, etc., all there to spook you out. I wound my way down the Wendigo hole last month. Then,
I know.
Yes, I know, because I was sharing and what I was listening for was the points that don't just sound like everything else.
Right, and that's where the rub is. That's where you actually get interesting things that, in my experience, might have a grain of a real experience somewhere.
Yes, and I think that there are real experiences hiding within these narratives, or someone had a real experience and passed it on a couple of times, and then it made its way into an upload. There's just it is a fascinating sociocultural ball of spookiness. And that process, I think, is one of the things that I find really engaging. Pardon me.
I do too.
And I think it's very important to, certainly on one hand, to take these stories and these narratives with a grain of salt. To take them with a certain amount of realist, of a realist perspective, of the idea that a lot of this isn't real. but it's very entertaining. And it's certainly easy to approach it, especially if you're new to the field, to approach it with a lot of naivete. Oh my goodness, everyone has been accosted by a Wendigo in Appalachia, so on and so forth. And it is naivete, but
it is.
It's also important to understand that we are witnessing the upload of modern lore.
Yes, and I think that's something, and that's something that came up at the conference we were at Saturday, that people think lore is static and that it's set in stone and that it's old and it has to be at least 100 years old, and forget that it's still being made and it's changing. And I admit that there's also not only these written stories, but so many people are throwing up videos on YouTube about going to, quote, haunted places. And I find some of them very interesting, the way they approach it. And you see all of the pat cliches over and over and over. And so many of them thrown in that they are internally inconsistent in a lot of these, narratives in these videos, that the people actually doing it, some of them I think are, obviously are in on the joke, wink, wink. Some of them don't seem to be. They
Right.
don't seem to get that you can't have this and this at the same time. And because there is such a mass consumption of this, we're no longer sitting around the campfire or the hearth telling these stories, so that little Bobby goes, "Now, Grandpa, wait a minute, I thought you said this happened, or they did that," so that, it gets sorted out and there's more internal consistency over time. You're losing that because it's just thrown out there and people are consuming it. I think a lot of people tend to consume it hook, line, and sinker.
Agreed. Without contextualizing it properly.
Right. Or just some critical thinking, is what they've presented here internally consistent, and does it make sense? Or did they just throw out every cliche they could think of to be overly dramatic?
Right. And in all fairness, if a little bit of critical thinking and approaching this, particularly from a literary perspective, if you're accustomed to writing, there will be tells in the process. Yeah. And now this is jumping subjects just a little bit, but another rabbit hole that I went down in terms of internet lore is of course Skinwalkers.
Yes.
And there's a number of associated phenomena with Skinwalkers. Just ask the internet, it will tell you. But then we're not far enough along to do a lot of disclosure on this, but you did an interview that involved first person accounts, and there was maybe 3 to 4 characteristics that show up in the internet lore that was recounted first person with the Skinwalker phenomena. Yes. And to me, that was really phenomenal. And I can't, we won't say anything beyond this other than this was a reputable source.
Yes, very reputable, very credible source. And it was one that when you go through it, you go, okay, there's some substance here, where I've heard other stories that it just does not ring true.
No. And I will tell you, I'd been binging the urban legend YouTube lore for probably 3 weeks before you conducted that first person interview.
Yeah.
And so, and I'm just listening to this stuff and I'm like, wow, that's creepy. That's fun. That's, okay, this is part of the compendium of lore. That's cool. Wouldn't want to find that on a dark night. Okay, thumbs up, And then I hear the interview and there's about 5 points that the hair on the back of my neck stood up.
Yeah.
Because I'm going, oh, this person is reputable and they're recounting personal experiences and they're serious.
Mm-hmm. Very serious.
And I'm going, this is where, what gets real. and I'm going, okay. And I think this speaks to the Halloween season. This is where we get back on, exit back onto the main road here. This is where stuff gets real. And suddenly the world as we know it is suddenly expanded into a world as we don't know it.
Right. And that happens. And, and we go through a lot of interviews before, in between getting those, for everyone that is like that, you can go through 20 that aren't, that you just go, I don't know.
Mm-hmm. And I would say, and of course, this is difficult to document. It's difficult to document impressions or the energy within a space.
It can be, yes.
But something that is consistent, I'm going to reference the Skinwalker phenomena.
Okay.
A consistency in the reputable documentation that also carries over, but into the lore, is the idea that, for example, and for people who don't know, Skinwalker is an individual who engages in very dark shamanistic, traditionally Navajo practice to turn themselves into a dog, or a dog creature. And for a variety of reasons, some of them very, logistic reasons, because Skinwalkers travel very quickly. And many of them for very negative reasons.
Yeah.
The intent to inflict harm, often on individuals who really are largely innocent of, simply being in the wrong place at the wrong time, that kind of idea.
Yeah.
And a consistent element of this is, you see the dog and the dog looks at you and you know that there's something wrong with this. And if you were to ask the person, okay, what was wrong? I mean, there are many times throughout our lives that we see a dog and the dog turns to look at us. What's the big deal? And the person would say, it was wrong. There was something about it that initiated an understanding that says this is not, we've stepped outside the boundaries of normal.
And to be honest, I think it touches on those primal instincts from, thousands of years ago that kept us alive in the wild, that of sensing, danger and things being out of place.
Yes. And to me, it's very difficult to, especially to a skeptic, to quantify that, because
it is,
quite frankly, anyone could say, I had an experience and it just felt wrong.
Right.
Okay, those are just words, until you're the one that is having the actual experience.
Exactly.
And I think coming all the way back to sort of our primer of Halloween, take a step back to Celtic Britain as a whole, And, it is a time of the great bonfires on the hill, running the cattle between the bonfires to ensure, fertility of the cattle season next year. And it is a very dark, physically dark time. The days are getting much shorter. The nights are getting much longer. There's chill in the air. And let's take ourselves out of our modern day perspective for a moment and say, at some point, I'm purely conjecturing, but, walking from one community to another and coming upon figures in the mist, and knowing in a way that instinctually, that these figures they don't belong on our side of the veil.
Right.
But they're here. To me, that's Halloween.
I agree. And to be honest, I think that is the sense that everyone tries to capture in a bottle for Halloween.
Yes.
And not very few ultimately have those experiences quite like that. And maybe the failure to have that experience is what turns skeptics into curmudgeons. I don't know.
Quite possible. At the very least, just eat your way to the bottom of the Halloween candy. You'll be happier.
Exactly. That might be a good place to stop for tonight. And then we'll take up the conversation next week with more along the same vein as we delve into October.
Absolutely. Looking forward to that. And we're going to do a deep dive on something bloody on the subscribers tonight. Yes.
So if you're interested in more in-depth discussions that are on the page, check out the subscribers group.
Absolutely. We thank everybody for being a part of this journey of Dark Ozarks, and hope to see you soon at a live event.
Yes. Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Josh.
Thanks, Lisa. Thanks, Alex. Night, everybody.
Night.